Hallo und danke, dass Sie bei unserer ersten Kunstpräsentation aus New York mit dabei sind. Guenter Maislinger hier. Seit vielen Jahren bin ich Kunstliebhaber und verfolge Karrieren von aufsteigenden Künstlern mit Begeisterung. Mit vielen meiner Kunden besuchten wir Galerien und Kunstateliers dieser talentierten Menschen für viele Jahre. Da dies seit der Covid-19-Krise nicht mehr möglich ist, haben wir uns entschlossen, Ihnen diese Exkursionen auf virtueller Weise näher zu bringen. Gemeinsam mit meiner langjährigen geschätzten Kollegin, Kunstprofessorin Silvia Laudien-Meo, die als Dozentin bei MoMA, dem Museum of Modern Art, am Guggenheim Museum, dem Metropolitan und dem Jüdischen Museum agiert, starten wir heute diese Künstlerserie mit Tim Kent. I'm very excited. Gleich nachdem ich sein erstes Gemälde sah, wusste ich, dass ein Riesentalent dahinter steht. Seit circa 5 Jahren kenne ich ihn und verfolge seinen Aufstieg in seiner Welt mit immer noch mehr begeisternderen Werken. Wir möchten Ihnen hier kurz Tim Kent vorstellen, kleine geschichtliche Hintergründe über seine Person. Tim Kent war in British Columbia in Vancouver geboren, vor nicht allzu langer Zeit. Er ist als junger Mann, als Student nach New York gezogen und hat 2001 sein Bachelor's Degree in Kunstgeschichte vom Hunter College in Manhattan, New York City erhalten. Danach ist er umgezogen nach England, um dort bei der Universität of Sussex at West Dean College, ein kleines, ausgezeichnetes College in the United Kingdom, hat er 2005 sein Master's Degree in Fine Arts erhalten. 2009 ist er nach New York zurückgezogen, nach Brooklyn, um genau zu sein, nach Bushwick, und hat dort sein Studio und ist auch dort eingezogen. In Bushwick, in Brooklyn, hat er Irina Protopopov kennengelernt, von der er seit 2012 in New York repräsentiert wird durch die Slag Gallery. Irina Protopopov war in Rumänien geboren, kam als junge Dame nach New York und hat hier studiert und hat ihren Dentist-Doktorat in New York gemacht. Ist nach Italien für 2 Jahre, ist 2 Jahre nach Paris und hat sich dort als Implant-Spezialistin etabliert, also Dentist. Sie hat während ihrer Dentist-Karriere bemerkt, dass sie lieber Kunst hat als wie Zähne. So ist sie zurück nach New York und hat ihre erste Galerie eröffnet in Chelsea. Danach ist sie nach Bushwick gezogen für einige Jahre in dieses heiße Künstlerviertel, wo bestimmt 3.000 bis 5.000 Künstler wohnen, agieren und ihre Kunst verkaufen mittlerweile. Und ist im April 2020 zurück nach Manhattan gezogen. Wir werden die zweite Show von Irina bei der Slag Gallery in Chelsea über Tim Kent, die wir in Kürze gleich erleben dürfen. Die Slag Gallery auf der 19. Straße in Chelsea zwischen der 10. und 11. ich das erste Mal besuchen kam, ist mir gleich aufgefallen. Sie ist im Gebäude von der Stararchitektin Annabel Seldorf, eine deutsch geborene Architektin. In Deutschland kennt sie, glaube ich, kaum jemand. Hier ist sie sehr angesehen. Und bei 522 West 19 ist die Galerie Slag Gallery. Umzingelt, direkt gegenüber, der weltberühmte, einer der einflussreichsten Galeristen dieser Welt, auch deutsch geboren, David Zwirner. Neben der Galerie, Shiguro Ban hat seine Metal Shutter Houses entworfen. 8 Wohnungen mit immens hohen Decken, doppelstöckig, Ultraluxus. Gleich daneben, die Nachbarn, sind das Interactive Corp Gebäude von Frank Gehry. Gegenüber davon Jean Nouvel, 111th Avenue, Wohnungsgebäude, sensationell. Zur östlichen Seite ist gleich die Highline und gleich nebenbei ist Thomas Heatherwick, der englische Architekt, Künstler, der hier die Little Island im Hudson River entworfen hat. Die ist noch nicht ganz fertig. Man kennt ihn wahrscheinlich am besten von der Vessel bei den Hudson Yards. Und er hat gerade neben der Slack Gallery seine Lantern Houses gebaut, diese lanternenähnlichen Wohnungen. Also die Irina ist umzingelt, die Slack Gallery, von dem weltbesten Architekten, also in bester Nachbarschaft. Hier sehen wir Irina vor dem Studio von Tim Kent in Bushwick. Irina hat den Ruf, dass sie ihre Künstler, sie hat so um die 10, die sie repräsentiert, in ihre Studios einsperrt. Und sie kommt vielleicht einmal am Tag vorbei, sperrt die Tür auf, dass die Künstler raus können und etwas Luft atmen. So sehen wir sie hier. Man braucht Disziplin und viele Stunden Mühe, um so erfolgreich zu werden wie die Künstler von Irina. Bevor wir den Künstlerteam kennt und bevor wir Silvia Laudien-Meo dazu schließen, der wunderbare Spruch von Oscar Wilde hat mich ergriffen und den möchte ich kurz vorlesen. Er hat gemeint, dass die Vergangenheit gehört den Historikern. Die Gegenwart sei das Reich der Journalisten. Künstler sehen die Zukunft. Im heutigen digitalen Zeitalter ist die Zukunft schwerer und schwerer zu erkennen. Was sehen und sagen unsere Künstler? Was sagt Tim Kent? Well, let's find out. And here, welcome everybody. Silvia Laudien-Meo, and we have our star, Tim Kent. Welcome to our first artist session. I'm so excited, and off we go. Silvia, take it away. Let's have a few questions and answers with Tim.
All right. Yes, welcome everybody. We're excited having this interview with our famous Tim Kent today. He's in his studio, everybody socially distancing in their spaces. But I got to see this amazing new work in his gallery, and it's really something to see. So we're going to discuss some of his older works and then move into the gallery space with the new works. Tim, you're in New York now, or Brooklyn, which is really the navel of the world, right? You grew up in Canada, lived on the other coast, right? From Vancouver, the northwest coast of America, but then spent quite some time in our beloved Europe, in England, right? West to the West Dean College in East Sussex. Now here, do you still feel like this is the center of the artwork right now, world right now, here in New York City, the place to be for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has been the center of the art world, and in the last 20 years, it's kind of exploded. At one point, there was sort of several. Well, there are a few places to go. London was getting big, and I think Berlin was getting really big. Yes. And then, for some reason, the scene's cooled off there, but they kept growing here. And so, this is a place to be, I think, if you're going to try and be in this kind of manic business. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Guenter and I agree, right? We love this place here, and the creative spirit is just amazing in New York. So here we have this whole list also of your solo exhibitions, and you're showing a lot here in New York, but you've also shown in Europe, in the in UK, Switzerland, Germany, the Netherlands, and I'm always intrigued, like thinking, how's that different? Like you travel with your shows, you show your work. You know, in Europe, is that different? Like you see your works hanging there. Do people react to it differently? What changes, like the vibe? Do they connect with different?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things about having done my undergraduate degree in the U.S. at Hunter College in New York, it was mainly conceptual work. Was the base of what we were trying to study at the time. So it was things like painting weren't so important, and painting had kind of fallen out of fashion. But going to Europe, there's a long tradition of painting that hasn't been kind of eradicated by the ultra-modern movements, right? The new material movements. And I think that kind of gave me a sense of security in approaching the work and staying with the work rather than sort of beginning to experiment in other mediums. And the other thing was, every time I go to Europe, I'm surprised by how the audiences are positively responding to the work. So it's a pleasant surprise. Whereas in the U.S., it took a lot longer to sort of get a foothold because people didn't want to see this sort of stuff. 10 years ago, people didn't want to see see paintings, but now you see all these artists who are going back into it, and you see them working in painting and two-dimensional media, and not necessarily painting, but I think things like different sort of collage mediums and two-dimensional medium in general, especially with the digital screens coming out and photography is making a resurgence as a fine art, especially with film photography. So yeah, I mean, I think showing in Europe has been a real experience, a good experience.
I have a quick question too. What made you decide to go from New York to Westdean in Sussex to get your master's in fine art? I want to know that bridge.
When I graduated from university, I started painting pictures about the city, sort of doing these small landscapes. And the city, I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and I went out to see some relatives of mine. And they had mentioned that around probably about 10 miles from their house, there was a master's program for painting, which was a small program. And so I went to look at this program, and it was in the most idyllic, bucolic landscape. And it was the farthest thing from Brooklyn. And I was just like, this place is amazing. So I'm gonna apply for it. And I applied for it. And it was a very small program, and it was very craft-based program. So it was all about sort of practical application, not only the theoretical ideas that underpinned the work. And so that's how I ended up going there. Uh-huh. And the cost of the program was about a fifth of the U.S. programs, and I think for probably a better education.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is how you then sneaked your way into some of these amazing old mansions where we still see some inspiration today in your work.
Yeah, so I was, at that time I had finished the master's program, and with another artist, we began looking for a place to exhibit the works we had been doing. And the works we had been doing were not that great. But the woman who ended up lending us her barn was a writer for the Arts newspaper. And she saw my sort of interior works that I was beginning to develop while I was at Westing College. And she suggested that I go talk to some of her friends. And some of her friends had these old stately homes that they were kind of like trying to keep going. And so that was how I got into these houses. And once you start getting into sort of like the stately home world, the doors start, the enfilade starts opening.
Yes, we'll see that in your recent show, right? Yes. Yeah.
So this is, so as these doors started opening, I was like, okay, and the houses kept getting more and more grandiose and spectacular. And of course, coming from Brooklyn, it's a complete privilege, and it's also mind blowing because all of a sudden you're surrounded with the best of the high Baroque, the best of the Edwardian, the best of the Georgian period. I mean, it was insane. So I could go into these places and see the artifacts, and I had all these ideas. And I also knew how to handle the spaces I was looking at, and so I could think about ways of composing pictures using the photo references I was making, but also a lot of rigorous drawing that would go into them later. And that's how I think I managed to make those earlier works really successful. So.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. So these are some more.
So here the group exhibitions for everybody to have on file. And here is the first show with Slack Gallery in 2015.
Yeah, so now you have your works hanging right in the middle of Chelsea in these amazing buildings. And, Guenter and I visit you regularly in your studio in Brooklyn, which is, small. There's no window. It really, it's like this very personal place. We see another picture later on with your cat there, and you spend, real thinking and working time there. Like, how do these paintings, how do they breathe differently to you? Like, is that important to you? Where are they hanging? Where are they seen? Do you think about, like, where they're going to end up? Like, to them, there must be like babies that are alive somehow. Do you think about like what would be a great place for them to find their home and to live, you know, or to...
Well, obviously they should hang in the Louvre, but that's probably not going to happen.
I know.
Exactly.
And I was writing the question, I was thinking that too. Yeah.
But I think part of the, you know, again, like as you mentioned, the studio has no windows in it, and it's all the light is artificial, and you know, I have venting systems to help carry out the fumes, but I deliberately decided not to have windows so I wouldn't get too much influence from what was happening outside. And as the works begin building, as I begin building a show, the works begin to talk to each other. So they begin, little parts of them relate to each other. So in the two pieces that you selected here, which is the Strange Attractor and Somnambulist, this idea of the sort of round shape, you know, whether it's coming out in the Somnambulist, it's kind of coming towards the camera, and where in the Strange Attractor, it's kind of moving away from the camera. The technique is the same in both of them. So both of these paintings are beginning to inform each other on how they get built. And one thing I've learned in my painting career is that I don't think I've ever finished a painting. I think what happens is I'm very process oriented. So I want to constantly build a layer, create a layer, wipe out a layer, or change what's happening on the surface all the time. And the moment it's done is the moment it leaves the studio. So in this case, all these pieces get made, and then they go to the gallery, and then they get put on the wall. And now they're no longer sort of in this chaos of the space that I live in, and I work in, and I get to see them for the first time once they hit the walls of the gallery. And so when they hit the walls of the gallery, I can actually begin to assess what I've done with the painting or what the painting is doing. Before then, it's literally, the paintings are sort of places where I organize the mess of my studio, and then when it's left, it's now existing in its own right, and basically I just have a really messy studio left over.
So do you ever find yourself then going back on the back to the painting once it's in the gallery and changing a little bit of something still, where you see, oh, you know, something now I noticed?
No.
God. Once you let go, you let go, right?
Yes,
it's out of the house.
Yes, of course, yes. I've definitely gone back to the gallery and touched up the work.
Yeah.
I've definitely spent a couple. I think I've driven Irina, my gallerist, crazy by kind of coming in the morning of the show and like retouching something.
Oh yeah.
So,
yes, he definitely has a strong mind on your side. Yes. Cool. Yeah. So where do these spaces come from? Actually, that is something that would be interesting to me. Also, you say like process is super important to you, of course, right? But like for us who are not artists, like where do you start even with these spaces? Where do they come from? Do they live like, you know, in your memory? Do they come up in your dreams? Do you construct them in your mind, or where does it, you know?
Well, I think that question's really good, especially with regards to this painting, 5 Minute Warning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I think what it shows, I really start from an abstract composition. And so in this painting, you have this sort of large shape happening at the bottom, this sort of like almost like a pyramid shape. And then you got this red shape. And then you got this sort of mountainous shape happening at the top. And these are all abstract patterns. And once I kind of get something that is exciting for me in terms of my eye, in terms of the abstraction of the canvas, or the design of the canvas, then I can begin building into it with putting space in or taking space out. And so in this painting in particular, you kind of have 3 or 4 different spaces happening simultaneously. You have this sort of strange electrical thing happening at the bottom of the painting. And then you have this sort of industrial grids layer with these sort of red lines.
Yes.
And then you have this idea of people, what I think about people traveling in some sort of either an airplane or a train. So they have their own space, and that has its own logic. And then you have this sort of like, and it's imposed upon this sort of strange Bruegel background, right? And so I'm trying to I try and add into the abstraction some sort of narrative layer. And I don't want it to look, I want all my spaces to be somewhat recognizable, but at the same time, I don't want them to be exact. So I want them to sort of give an idea of something. And again, I think that sort of that Bruegel or that Leonardo type background is an example of sort of the imposition of a classical system on top of a very modern design, I think.
Yes.
To me, something like this is just stunning. I have found no other word but stunning. I really do.
Thank you.
I'm intrigued also by the by your titles here. You mentioned narrative, because that's also always, you know, like a question you ask yourself. You see something that's there's a lot of abstract layers, and you definitely see how here, you know, the space and the architecture is important. Wait, Guenter, could you go back just to the 5-minute warning? That was like a, thank you. Because that is quite a very specific title, right? That makes it, even if you look at the painting and enjoy the abstraction and, you know, like the looseness of the suggestions, then 5-minute warnings, that's pretty concrete. And then you wonder, like, what's going on here? What's, you know, then there's like something there's tension. That's another layer, sort of, right?
You know, I think this particular piece, I think the song's called 5 Second Warning. It was a song by Radiohead, and basically it has this very, very strange, somber, atmospheric quality to the sound of the song. And as I was making the piece, I was like, you know, the feeling that I'm getting from this song really relates to this painting. And then as I began putting the figures into it, I began to think about it. There was an emergency. There was some sort of urgency that was happening here. And I wanted to give the piece a title that expressed the urgency of an event. Yeah. And so I ended up with the 5-minute warning, because it's an odd amount of time, isn't it? You have 5 minutes. There's a 5-minute warning of something, and that precedes some sort of terrible event. And again, I think, you know, I'm not I don't have a lot of hope in the future, because I think we're kind of living at the cusp of the end of a cycle of something. And so most of my work does tend to have I tend to title the work after something that is giving some sort of pre-idea of a failure.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, yes. And you definitely get that mood from it, yeah.
Well, some sort of foreshadowing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're all scared now.
Also, you started. You are a musician as well, right? You played in a band, and so music must be, you know, something that's with you always, right? That you think of in terms of rhythm or mood, or in musical terms when you paint.
Well, I mean, I do think I do get a fair amount of visual ideas from listening to different types of music.
Yeah.
And I think that in this case, I mean, rarely do I name something after a piece of music, but in this case, this was one of these works. But I do visualize when I listen to music, without a doubt, and I do get compositional ideas when I'm listening to music, and it can be any kind of music. It has to be the right mood, and if something connects, then I'll definitely start seeing something. Like
Kandinsky.
Like Kandinsky, and in fact, when I was a very young artist, I was reading Kandinsky, a lot of Kandinsky, and Point and Line to Plane is probably one of the more influential texts in my that I've read. It really made sense to me, because all of a sudden the sound that he's talking about, and I have students today that I ask, you know, can you describe this symbol that I'm making as a noise? So, and it's a great exercise, because if you can begin sort of visualizing sound, then you're making that abstract connection that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. That's why it's convincing. Yeah. Kamal is this next painting that we're looking at, and I love like this balance. There's always like a balance or tension between different elements in your work. There's definitely here the structure, like these geometric architectural structures that are part of most of your works. But then there is also here it seems to kind of intrude in the landscape here. Like if you envision like this gorgeous landscape with mountains and maybe a valley, but then it's as if the structure is really like built into it and destroying this beautiful landscape, but it still kind of survives. And then in the lower parts, there's also these beautiful painterly passages, these very organic and colorful passages that seem to kind of fight back, and which I find intriguing. Oh, you're standing right there.
Yeah, it's right there. Exactly.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah, actually, I don't own this painting. But it lives here. The person who owns the painting has left it here.
Okay, it's on
until they
loan
can
to
get
you.
a house that's big enough to fit the painting. So it's been living here.
Okay, I did want to pause for a while. I love the light here. We're not really sure where does the light come from, right? It's such an intimate, quiet, beautifully lit interior. So, yeah, do you and the figure here, we're not really sure. This could be one of your fancy interiors in the south of England, right? Or is it more invented? Like, what brought you to this interior here?
I think the first thing was that this painting really worked accidentally, because I remember all of a sudden the color beginning to do what it needs to do by itself. Right, the color began to kind of emerge out of these glazes that I was putting onto it, and that sort of greeny gold. I remember when the greeny gold violet in the background. I remember when it started coming together. I was like, this could be a very, very simple painting, and it just needs a little element of movement somehow. And a few years ago, I had a lady model for me in this fantastic gown that she had bought, and I was like, I can imagine her being in this space somehow. And so I took this idea of her moving through this space, and this dress, kind of this chiffon-y dress, kind of moving in that space. And that's kind of where that painting developed from. And I wanted it to be just a simple interior and have an idea of movement to it. And it turned out really well. It was very simple, and it also helped me simplify my ideas slightly. And so this is something that, as I developed the show that I've just opened at Enfilade, this is kind of one of the pieces that inspired what was going to come later.
Yes,
for sure. But it took 4 years to get there. You know?
Yeah. I love, again, the layer of the title, right? That's so loose, but it's very powerful. Like, you look at this painting with the title, and you can come up with like a whole movie around it.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. I agree. I think everything. I'm really happy you selected this piece, because everything about it works, I think, and I like this piece very much.
Cool.
All right. Guenter is showing us here 3 images from your exhibitions in Germany. So you showed your work 2017 in Fernheim, in Waldorf, and what was it like for you to be in Germany? I can see that that there's a lot of connection. What impressed you most about showing they're traveling through our country?
Well, I think first off, I really, really like the German people, and I found them very warm, and I found them very accepting of what we were doing. I found the people that supported the arts were enthusiastic about having us come in and do something. And I also found the country to be intriguing, because you have places that were severely damaged, and they were rebuilt again. And this is a very, very powerful nation that really put itself together again. And I think that's something I admire a lot. I think also the way in which you have this, it is kind of like the central grid of Europe of power distribution. So you have all these sort of electrical systems running across the landscape, which at the time I was so into, because you have these sort of these symbols of the modern world as and its reliance on electricity, and you have this landscape that's kind of integrated into the electrical grid. And I think I was driving from
No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think I was driving back. I was in Saarbrück, and I was driving back to Frankfurt, and I remember coming over the hill, this big hill, this mountainside, and it was early morning, and you saw these sort of golden electrical wires everywhere. And I thought, that is a beautiful image. Like, that is an incredible image, and it's something I think it's something I actually add in my paintings now. Oh, as I'm doing sort of the drawing, the line drawing that I do in my later work. So yeah, I think that definitely impressed me.
My question was going to be, is that where the pylons first came to your attention when you drove through Germany, or have you had your obsession with them?
No, it's
because they keep showing up.
No, that was when I started thinking about the pylons earlier.
Okay.
But if you are a pylon fetishist, the way I am, then you will find that every single generation of pylon is accessible. I took so many photographs of pylons in my drive across Germany.
Okay. Here, the Hearst Building, named after the founder William Randolph Hearst, the world's largest publishing company in the 1920s. Still today, the Hearst Corporation produces a dozen plus magazines like Cosmopolitan, Elle Decor, Harper's Bazaar, the O magazine, Oprah Winfrey. They're also part owners of A&E, the Arts and Entertainment Network, and ESPN TV. They employ about 20,000 people with revenues of about $12 billion in 2019. The building was designed by British architect Lord Norman Foster. In 2003, it was the first environmentally friendly building with a platinum rating by LEED, the Green Building Council of America. Every year, the Hearst highlights works by artists through their art program, Art Now. Out of thousands of applicants, roughly 30 artists get chosen to exhibit their work for 6 months on the second floor at the Village Square in their building. Tim Kent has been chosen twice, in 2017 and in 2019, where the theme of it was Metamorphosis, Climate Change. It's an amazing painting, the Tagebau.
Yes, even without
2017, and this was the one chosen for the 2019 show at the Hearst Tower, Isotopia.
Yeah, this definitely stands out for the color, right? Like, what inspired you here? Is that music too that brought in the yellow?
Well, this painting, the color is really intense. I mean, this is a very large painting. I mean, it's nearly 10 foot by 10 foot, I think. Or 9 feet by 9 feet. But I think what happened, what I tried to do is express the idea of things we can't see around us. So sort of like electromagnetic waves, or any sort of communication waves, or even just, radiation waves, anything that we've made and is in the environment now. And I wanted to try and get an idea of that invisibility to be expressed. And I thought I'd try and pick the most bright minerally color I could, and I chose this sort of yellow, and it kind of took over. But one thing I do like about this particular painting is the way the yellow vibrates, and you can't really tell if it's sitting on the front or if it's in the background, and that's kind of what I was going for. And so I thought about this sort of almost sort of futuristic landscape with these very, very intense colors. No trees, just air full of some sort of electrical impulse. Mm-hmm. And that's where this painting kind of stemmed from. And I think I put a couple little characters in the middle right corner, just to give it a little bit of a little Bruegel story.
Yes.
I always like to use sort of Bruegel as an example of how to get little characters doing funny little things in these paintings.
All the way in the far back, it seems like a very peaceful landscape, actually.
Yeah, to me, it began to look a bit like Las Vegas.
Uh-huh.
So you see peaceful landscape, I see Las Vegas.
Okay.
Yeah, that wouldn't be peaceful.
Right.
Feeling now here, this is the first painting we're looking at where the figures are really very close up to us, right? Like very corporately dressed figures here caught in this web of or the structural web. You said in previous interviews also that you were interested in like power structures in the political system. You just said yourself, right? What are these order types here? What are they about? these order.
Okay, so the term order types is a market term, is stock market term. Obviously, you place an order, you put money into the market. So that's the different types of orders that are going into the market. The other thing is it's a pun or it's a play on the word order types. And here you have the sort of presidential signing of, I think this was the Tax Repeal Act of 1984. And you have all these sort of presidential characters clapping the president for putting this, or applauding the president for putting the law into, putting the order into law. And so, but they all have their place in this sort of hierarchy of relationship to the president. And so each one of these characters is closer, and they're all smiling, but they're actually not smiling. And are they really clapping for this guy, or can they really want to get rid of this guy? So there's this relationship. There's a play on the word order there. And then, of course, I put it into such a tight geometric structure. So I've ordered it. I've ordered this thing as well. And the last thing was kind of thinking about the way in which we perceive imagery. And we don't really perceive imagery as what we experience immediately. We all have these sort of, our brain makes ideas of what we see. And our brain is what we see in terms of digital content, what we see in terms of flat magazine content, what we see in terms of real content. I think there's a disconnect in our heads about how we see these things, but we simply just accept them as part of our reality. And so now we have all these different types of mediums or media that we exist with simultaneously. And so part of this grid system with these figures moving into this space and dissolving is what I was trying to express.
Yeah.
Is that fairly clear? Did I have any questions?
Makes sense. Yeah. So you used here actually like a specific photograph. Do you find them, you just pull them out of the media photographs that are interesting to you, or?
I try to use imagery from public archives.
Okay.
If I'm looking for types of imagery, either I do my own photography, or I do my own drawing or my own design, or I try and find things that are specifically in the public archive, because I think it's interesting what nations decide to keep for their public records.
It's very selective and very interesting. Yeah.
And so you can get a certain amount of imagery, and you might not get the imagery you want, but you get something that'll be representative of a time and a place or an ideology.
Yes. The WPA times are very interesting that way. They kept everything, right? There's
absolutely
the Security Administration. There's a huge wealth of photos from that time.
Absolutely, totally.
Yeah. This is Guenter's backdrop now,
this is my
right?
background, exactly.
Yeah.
Obviously, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is part of the show, the 2018 show, Dark Pools and Data Lakes at Slack Gallery.
Yes, it looks like the very similar grouping of figures, but they're harder to detect here, like in the 5-minute warning, right? Like again, like a group of people somehow hovering there in the center, right, together. And then I don't know, you can take it different ways. Maybe in the background, my association would be with the corporate building and maybe the moon in the back there. But then you're calling it dark pools and data lake. To me, it looks also again like, like the darkness is more for me in the sky, where the lake actually looks pretty light and almost like a sky, and it is infinite in terms of space. It's very complicated, very complex, interesting painting. And then data lakes, so you're thinking about, we talked about just before, the digital world. Like, is that something to you that creates order, or something that rather makes us lose our footing, like this wealth of information that we live with right now? Or maybe
I mean, I think it's a confusing time, because I think we are legitimately on the cusp of a whole new world structure. I think it's one that is about large organizations having all the information that we don't even know we are giving them, in which it just goes into these large sort of dark pools, right? Or these data lakes, sorry. And they're just information about us that can be bought by anybody.
Yeah.
And so in my painting, I've always borrowed from earlier paintings when I've kind of created a successful language system. So as you pointed out, the figures in this one look like they come from 5 Minutes Morning, right? And in fact, they are, because it was for me, it was such a successful way of expressing a certain idea that I could use it again in this one. And so there's sort of an iconography that I begin to develop and then use in the works. And again, I liked your interpretation of this sort of background being some sort of corporation, I think you said. Mm-hmm. But to me, it is a corporation. It's an organized entity of something that happens in the background. And then you have this corporation of bodies in the foreground. And then you have all these connections that are running up to them as they're kind of dropping their information into this large electrical lake. Right? So the whole lake is electrified. And then you have this idea of it being sort of extraplanetary with this strange moon in the background. And one thing I wanted to do with this painting was play up the falsity of the surface, or the plastic surface, so that what looks like a red rock moving into the water is actually just a sort of scar of paint, and making sure that the whole surface everything that you see undoes itself as you look at it. Mm-hmm. And so that's one reason why I think this painting is successful, because it never really resolves into anything permanent. And again, when I was putting this together, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, there are these two little figures, and I liked the idea of the lake of it wasn't the lake of fire. It's the damned. It's the damned, I think, from the Inferno, where they can never they're in purgatory. They can never go between heaven and hell. And so you have this Rubens painting with all these figures being thrown up to the sky and being tossed back down again. Mm-hmm. And on the side, I think the artist was Gustave Doré, and he's got these little figures of Virgil and Dante sitting by the lakeside. And I thought that would be it'd be fun to put them in there as well, just making reference to an earlier idea of how we thought about things that we couldn't see. So that's why those little characters are in there.
Okay.
Wonderful.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Yes, it's very impressive. All makes very much sense. Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
I love this, how you're here starting to play like with your babies, with your paintings, and kind of placing them within, not only referencing them in terms of like iconography, but actually, including your paintings here in this interior. Again, it reminds me, maybe, is it one of the places that you visited in the south of England? It looks like a very stately interior, but so a lot of the cooking is around like more like like a corporate setting, maybe, again in the center. Tell us about the idea here. We're wondering about the story.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the nice things about making paintings is I might have my own idea about the work, and then all of a sudden, especially with sort of narrative painting, or this sort of like vaguely narrative painting, I have a story, and oftentimes it's not the same story that other people see. But I do think there are certain elements in this that, I use again. This particular room, I have a photograph of it, and I've used it so many times, just because it's like the gift that keeps on giving. Every time I look at this space, I get an idea for something else. It was an empty room.
Yeah.
And I could always fill it with things that there's always stories I want to tell. So I can always tell another story. And this one had this sort of weird, I couldn't tell if they were making a prayer, or if they were doing some sort of seance, if they were awaiting someone coming in the room, or if someone had just come in the room so everyone's standing up. I couldn't really tell, but there was this weird thing that was happening between these figures. And again, yeah, you're right. I started placing my own paintings in these spaces. And maybe this goes back to your first question. It's like, where do I see my paintings being? Well, I kind of actually see a painting, potential painting.
Okay, kind of, okay. Tim is...
We lost you for a second here, and now we still don't know where you see them.
Okay. Okay.
There
Can
you
you,
are.
is my connection so bad?
Sometimes it goes a little in and out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could be
Okay. Is it, do I have it now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear
Okay.
you
So
now.
where do you want me? Do you want me just to repeat what I just said?
Yes, where do you, about having your own paintings in that space, including them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I again, like you were asking me, where do I see my paintings going? And I jokingly said at the Louvre, but actually, I think about. I like the idea that when I'm on the internet, for example, there are these images that appear out of nowhere, and I see them as sort of a layered world of image upon image upon image upon image. And so I actually sometimes think I make my paintings to be characters in other paintings. And so you get this sort of meta layering of paintings per painting.
Yes.
And I did that in the last show, in the latest show. One of the pieces I replaced in the show, I actually painted it into the new painting that replaced it.
Yeah.
So.
We have
Very
one
intriguing.
more. We have one more painting before we go to the current show. And here's the directorate.
Yeah, the directorate. I thought this is also very, like, spatially, also the figure and the space is intriguing, because you really, you look at it, and you have again that that structure that you very often, the spatial structure, and it looks maybe as if it is going back, like as if it is an enfilade, right, like a very deep space, but you can also think of it coming up. Is it maybe, it makes me think of maybe film stills, like something, because I know you love film as well.
Totally.
Maybe also like a deck of cards that you flip, and you got like these figures there. And then you look at the two figures, first immediate reaction would be like a bridal party because of that white. But then if you look closer, it's definitely two men dressed in, in suit and tie as well. So you could read it so many different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you interpreted the background correctly. And I think this idea of layering of images in space, right, in this sort of space-time we live in, right? And that is exactly what I'm trying to convey there. And so one of the nice things about playing with this sort of geometry, this sort of simple perspective, which is, this old tool, is it allows sort of a very modern interpretation of when we look at it. And if we if one keeps an ambiguous background like this one is, it's easy to begin thinking of sort of film frames. And it's easy to begin thinking of sort of like a recession of like a moment of time. And I think that's really what that does to this painting. So I think you nailed that. And then the figures themselves, they're just, to me, they're just very, very, I don't really know about those figures. I have a lot of strange, because this was a life-size painting. And so these paintings, did you ever come to the studio when I was making this painting?
I remember the previous one. I'm not so sure about that one.
This is life-size. So, these figures are 6'5". And these are big figures, and so they did give this sort of imposing impression to anyone that looked at them. And the colors were schismatic. They kind of broke away from each other. And this was painted at the time of the election, so people would come into the studio with very, very clear ideas of what this was, right? And it began to take on this sort of political dimension to it. And this painting is now up in Chicago at the 21st Century Museum, Hotel Museum, and it's part of a show. I can't remember the title of the group show, but it's on now, and it has to do with sort of power and political power. Yeah. So this piece will always be associated with that idea. Yeah, I think.
Yes, I can see that too. Now that especially also this gesture, this pointed gesture. There's something very very powerful about that person, on the left figure.
That hook in there looks very evil.
Yes.
The what does?
The hook in the middle, the sort of a hand or finger pointing in the middle. It seems above the white suit.
Yeah,
it strikes me as very evil.
Maybe he's tickling him. I don't know.
Okay, shall we move on?
Yes, now coming to the
current show at the Slack Gallery. Okay, Enfilade it is. Here's the first painting. Odds are.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So now we have images, several images, actually, also close-ups of these of your work. So here, yes, I love this. Also, I have to say, here in New York City, we had the Gerhard Richter exhibition that only was up for 3 weeks, right? Gone. So for a lot of our German audience, I think that might be a painter on people's radar, because he's so much shown, and this very much reminded me of it. It's mostly more tangible than in other of your works, that you're working off a photograph, right? And also it seems like a little bit from the past, but then you're going back on it. Like if Guenter can go back, like here you see very clearly the photograph. Oh no, yeah. Oh, here it's cut off. That's a detail of it, right? In the finished version,
you want to see here? Okay.
See the head here, right? Would you see that the head, but you see how you work backwards from that, from this photograph, and then and you're toying, of course, you're adding these figures, and it becomes very intriguing. Like, who is this man, right? Is he an architect? Is he an urban planner? Is he a politician? What is he doing with these people here, standing in line? It's ominous, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this whole show was painted during the majority of the work was done during the beginning of the lockdown for the pandemic. So I was really informed by my own sort of anxiety of what was going on around us.
Yes.
And initially, I had started these paintings with a very vague idea of what direction they wanted to go into. But as the pandemic kind of took over and things became more and more, dystopic by day, I began to kind of think about what sort of things are happening now that I could talk about without having to make a direct connection to this pandemic as being the one big event, right? And part of it was this idea of just statistics, because everything became about statistics. And, 1 out of 10 people get this thing. 1 out of 10 people, da-da-da-da. And so I began to think about sort of how to make this painting, which was going to go in one direction with this sort of this 1950s traditional architectural photograph, move into something that really dealt with people now. And so I like this painting because the little people I took a lot of time to make them feel as real as possible, to make them individual as possible, and to remove the individuality of the sort of architectural figure at the top. But ultimately, it's this architectural figure who's kind of like, who plays God with these little people. It's the chance that's happening. The odds are that you go inside, the odds are you don't go inside. So there's the idea of playing with statistical chance. So that's kind of what I ended up doing with this. As far as the Richter is concerned, I mean, it's really hard not to be influenced by Gerhard Richter. It's really hard because, I mean, he's, in terms of the 20th century post-war figurative artist, I mean, he's probably number one. And then he also has a fantastic abstraction he does. So, yeah, it's very hard not to begin seeing that, for me as well, to not begin seeing that in the work. And I think that's okay. I think what he managed to introduce into the dialogue of painting is relevant, and it's one that should be sort of not exploited, but explored.
Yeah. These are wonderful close-ups of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
René Magritte always comes to mind also, the veiled faces, and we see on the on social media a lot now also, because he has these wrapped heads, right, kissing and moving in the world, right?
Yeah.
So here, this is fading room, you call it. This is where you said, no regrets, the previous picture that we saw with this beautiful light and the fancy lady inside, right? You can see definitely the connection here, but probably most likely known, of where you studied and all these beautiful mansions that you got to visit in the south of England. I'm wondering if that informed it here. Is it, again, your paintings also that you see? It's a very intriguing, at first moment it looks like, okay, I understand, you're inside this palace. The closer you look, then, there's a lot of mysterious, there are mysterious elements, like the figures don't all match. There's the shady kind of figures standing at the doorway. I also really like that figure that appears in the frame on the right side. Just, is it the reflection of a sculpture? Is it in a painting? Like you can think up all these different scenarios. What is this man in the doorway actually looking at? Like, do you even imagine what's in all these spaces? There's a lot to imagine again in that space, I feel.
Yeah, this was again a large painting.
Yeah.
And this one, when you walk into the gallery, I mean, it's one of those paintings that allows you to go into it. Like I feel when I see it, I want to step into it. And so one of the nice things about this painting was it happened very quickly and very easily. And it kind of just let itself be built. And it was one thing I tried to do at this point was reduce the amount of color I was using. And I thought I would put it in later, kind of almost do a traditional glazing technique to get this painting to work. So it started in black and white, and I began building the color into it later. And I do like the fact that it almost could be a picture postcard of something, but then it undoes itself again. So the figures are not really figures. Right? The paintings are not really paintings. Right? The hallway is probably the most solid structure in the place. But if you look at the painting, it really just dissolves, and everything begins to fall apart. And that's one of the things I do like about painting is sort of like the fooling it, to fool the perception, so that you question what you're looking at, and maybe you question your own presupposition of the work. So yeah, but again, you were right to point out that I have used this figure on the left. I have used this figure from in the past, but again, this is something I tend to do, is I tend to sort of reuse figures and place them and recontextualize them, because sometimes they actually just work better. And they take a long time to develop, these figures.
Oh, they're so wonderful.
You know?
Yes, I'm sure. But also once you've created imagery in your paintings, then they're created and they're kind of alive with you, for sure, with us also, right? Like so it makes sense that they reappear. Picasso did that also all the time, right?
Yeah. I think that's one of the cool things about Picasso. He was really good at playing with reinterpretation. And as a young artist, he was somebody who definitely influenced, as many artists, he definitely influenced me. And I think one of the nice things about what the Cubists did, and then the people that followed Cubism did, was they found a way to sort of make a great plastic interpretation of form.
Yeah.
And while maintaining the idea of space, even if they break down the space from its perspective system, from the natural way of looking at things, they kept the space in there. And then what you end up having by the 1950s and 1960s in painting is a complete reduction of space, where the painting itself is the object, right? And I think that there's a lot of wonderful ways to play with the painting if you treat it as an abstract composition, but allow for space to be, the visual perceptual space to be put back into it. And I think a lot of artists do that. I think, Kerry James Marshall, who the American artist Kerry James Marshall, does it beautifully. He uses these sort of flat Matisse-like planes, but at the same time, there's so much space in his paintings, and he's really just talking about what he sees around him. So he's an artist that I think introduces space, and I think I'm trying to do something similar, like to what he's doing.
Yes, but I think just like James Marshall, also I think people are craving figurative paintings, definitely after a long haul of where the focus was always on abstraction. And even like in museum collections, I can see all of this is unpacked again, even from the past, like all these figurative works that were, disregarded a little bit more because, abstraction was so mega important. And now you see so much more figurative work again, or with combination of abstraction. So you're falling right into that, for sure. Important to bring back.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also think that the drive, the ideological drive towards sort of pure abstraction that was kind of prevalent in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, with the Greenbergian school and the reactionaries, that's gone. I mean, we have a much more politicized art world now, which is really about sort of like the identity politic, and that's something that I think really relevant artists are exploring. But in some ways, that's kind of left a nice space for painters to just paint what they want to paint. and not have to be stuck in sort of like an ideological war of, are you a minimalist? Are you a materialist? You can do what you want to do. And I do think, how can we not want to talk about it? We're actually pretty interested, even though we're so stupid as human beings, our little follies are actually very, very interesting.
Artists are great thinkers, and so we need to hear what they have to say.
I think, hopefully. Yeah.
That's why we're here with Tim Kent.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. Let's see the next one. I think this is a most intriguing work for me. To me, like there's a lot of background, a lot of story, like very concrete story, because you started with a photograph of the Louvre, right? And during World War II, of artworks being evacuated from the Grand Galleries, and so we see here this chaos of frames, frames on the street, in the galleries on the floor, but then also some sculptural work. And here you chose from what you said, the figure of the dying Gaul, right? But he definitely, like, to me, he draws me so much. He has the color. He's turning. He's on the ground, turning around. There we can see actually also. This is on the right side an image of you creating this painting where it's still taped up, right? There's taped up and covered up. But so this figure definitely draws me in. It seems very much alive. It also makes you together with this title of Ambush, you feel like there's something happening right now. There's something very destructive and or like a fighting scene. Maybe it also drew my mind towards Syria and what we have going on right now in the world. This fear about our cultural heritage. Just in Lebanon, I think there was a lot of artwork lost as well during this explosion. So this stands out to me. It's more of a political work to me, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, this outside. What's it called? The Fading Room was the one piece I did before, was the first piece I'd finished. By the time I started doing the rest of the works for the show, we were deep in sort of crisis mode here, right? And so a lot of the imagery that I began to use has to deal with some sort of anxiety, and of course there is references to the artworks being the symbols of cultural heritage, and then either you protect them or you destroy them. And artworks are always used politically anyway, because I mean, if you think about these famous Buddhist statues that in the early 2000s the Taliban went and destroyed, or you look at what was happening in Syria with the ISIS raiders as they went across destroying cities, old ancient cities or museums. Or then you think about today, I mean, within the U.S. itself, it's like we have so little, in this country, we pay so little attention to cultural production for capital gain.
Yeah.
That it's the same story. It's just a different type of violence imposed upon the works. And again, when you have such fantastic imagery coming out of archives, such as the Louvre, putting all these pieces away or hiding them away, how can you not want to use these imagery and bring them in? I as soon as I see them, I think it's a movie, and it has to be somehow sort of like made into a work in which I get to be part of it somehow. And so there's part of that to it. And then again, the Dying Gaul, it was going to become too academic if I just kind of painted the figure itself. And so I figured it needed to break out of itself. And I kind of thought about it almost like the Dying Gaul is breaking out of an eggshell of sorts. So you get this weird, muscular thing appearing in it. So that's kind of where I kind of took the idea from. Yeah. And it worked really well in this space. So.
Yes, it's an intriguing space.
Here we in your space? In the windowless environment.
Yeah.
The master at work.
Yeah, I'm taping up the works, as you can see into it. This is stenciling. Because it's easy to sort of use a stencil, obviously mixing paint. can see it's a very reduced palette. So it's grayed before I start building colors into them. And what I tend to do is I build in sort of very flat geometric shapes, and then I'll begin to open up my open up the strokes and begin playing with the surface a bit. And I think that's what you see happening. Pretty. And that's a day's work done. Whew. Call it a day. Quite funny to watch it.
It's amazing. It's like a genius at work, right?
And so this will be a day's work, and then the next day I'll go and I'll see what I can adjust with that. And then this is designing the piece that I put in the show. I think you might have an image of it.
Yes, that's the new one, right? The new one that's... Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oops, sorry. There we go. Yes.
This definitely stands out as what this it's right, kind of like you walk into the gallery and it catches your attention for sure. It's more a romantic work at first, I find. When you look at it, it made me think of Cinderella, you know, sweeping the floors here. There's you know, like this traditional mansion maybe that you look at it, but then looking closer you understand also, wait a second, that same figure appears 4 times, right? Because she's also there by the fireplace, and then she's maybe twice in the back of it, right? So there is a repetition that makes it mysterious, and then you're calling it agent, right? Which also adds a whole other level of mystery and tension to it. Well,
this painting started off. Initially, I wanted just to make a very simple study of a room, but I knew it had to have something happen to it somehow. And it was this beautiful sort of overly ornate, and as someone said, it's rather cold interior. And I was like, yeah, that is what it is. And then I thought, it needs something that I wouldn't expect to see in a space like this normally. And I found this wonderful photograph of a sharecropper in the 1930s. And a sharecropper is somebody who lived on a sharecrop farm during the Great Depression. And they would, you know, work together. And she lived in this tiny little house with, you know, rough wood floors and flat wood walls. And she's scrubbing. She's on her hands and knees scrubbing. And she's this very powerful person. And I thought, this is this poor woman doing this thing. I thought she'd be perfect for this painting. So she needs to get in there somehow. So I began to use her, and I was like, well, what happens if she's actually painting out the painting? She's actually cleaning the painting away. So I thought of her as someone, as an agent who scrubbed away, you know, the painting itself. And so I kind of want, and I'm not sure if it works so well, but I kind of wanted to get the idea of you had a team that was moving through systematically cleaning and systematically undoing the painting from the inside. So that's kind of the idea behind how this image came about.
Yeah, you definitely can see her whitening the chair, right, that she's left. Sure. On the left side. What was intriguing to me also, because definitely in most of your works, you notice the grid structure, right? Like the lines that created like this imaginary grid. And then here, this is missing in a way. But then I realized like all these frames that the way you built, you know, you structure the walls, and there's, you know, more the detailing, or there are frames, but you almost can extend those and then come to the same grid, like in, you know, like that runs through the air also. It feels like it's still there, just like in a more traditional way, maybe.
Yeah, I think I only like to exploit the, you know, the geometry, the perspective when there's a time to do it. And here they didn't, the painting worked.
Yes.
I didn't need to force it. I didn't need to force anything into it.
No, because it's there anyway. Like you can just these frames are enough so that you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it's so wonderfully mysterious how she appears several times.
Definitely. I like that too.
Yeah. It just keeps you asking questions, or like wondering like how, what. It's that sense of mysticism is what I love. So
I love the little one at the back door. She's just kind of moving into the light.
Right.
She was my favorite.
Okay.
The light in general is very cool.
Does she have a name?
No.
Okay. All right.
Agent 3.
Okay, we move on.
Yeah.
Okay, appeal.
Yeah. Here, definitely, I was thinking of the erasing here because these figures, again, in this very elegant interior, and they're standing together, not sitting together like your grouping that we've mentioned, that we saw before. But then there is this geometry that make me think of kites more. They have kind of like the shape of the old-fashioned kite. But then you can think of them moving up, flying up, but you could also think of them falling down through this opening, but you can definitely also think of them as erasers because somehow like they go over these figures that seem to be taking them out maybe somehow also. And are they ghosts here? Are they actually present? It's a very mysterious presence that they have in this otherwise so clear and dignified kind of space.
These okay, so the show's called The Enfilade, and obviously if we look down the left side of the canvas, you have this this view down the hall, and that's the enfilade, this term. But the other use of the term is enfilade is a volley of bullets over an organized volley of bullets from one side to the other side of a battlefield. So the idea of sort of organized numerics, statistics again comes into this, and I like the idea of all these figures being organized in rows, and then I also like the idea of them standing next to the enfilade. So there's two enfilades that are happening. And then I also thought, the painting is very organized and it could be very quiet, but there needs to be some sort of noise into this to disrupt the organization of it. And I thought one way of doing that was by breaking the lie of the perspective, because by creating this sort of perceptual space, there must be a way to break it. And I thought, well, it's easy if you simply impose flat, obscure shapes on top of this thing coming out of the surface itself. So in the middle, there's this sort of triangular shape with these sort of white lines coming out of it. That's actually, to me, looks like it's coming right out of the wall. And so I wanted to impose a third layer onto this thing that undid the reading of the space as it was. And that's why I had this event happening. And I've had people interpret it in many different ways. And each time it's, okay, you can interpret it the way you want to. For me, it was a formalist issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but still, here they can see it more closer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a good detail.
Yes, because you're right. It really seems to be coming out of the wall and just like opening that space up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how you manage to create these depths of the hallways is just amazing. Mm-hmm. And here we go to Envoy.
Yes, this is the painting that we just saw you mixing the color, right, and taping it and doing the first day's work of it, right? So here, this is.
How long a process is it, approximately, from what we saw to this? I know that you work on multiple paintings at the same time, but the intricacy and the amount of thought and work in these paintings lead me to believe that it takes a long time. Can you share a little bit with that?
I mean, for me, making a painting is an involved process, and I've always tried to remove the amount of work I have to do, which doesn't really work. When I start a painting, I sit with it and I work with it, and I do as much work as I can on it till I can't work on it anymore for that day, and then I'll rest, and then I'll stay with a painting as long as it needs to be, as long as it needs work of some sort. So usually I do about a 12-hour day if you're thinking about sort of in terms of how many hours a day, and it's pretty much 6 to 7 days a week. If I can take a break, I usually take a break when I don't have any ideas or any plans. So now I'm finally having a couple of weeks off, but it's to take advantage of the summer before we go into the winter. And it's I'll just sit with them till they're done. And I
just want people to know what an enormous effort it is to create such pieces.
I don't have a life.
The determination.
And that's what you mean.
But that is a very, I mean, it's a gift to be, to have these, to be creative and to be able to create like these wonderful paintings. That is quite a life to have.
I'm lucky, for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm very fortunate.
Yeah.
And it shows all around of what you're giving us. And here the final defilade.
Yes, that is definitely a striking painting. It's also one of the larger ones in the exhibition. And this yellow huge brush stroke here that disrupts the scene is quite intense. It's not so you have, it also reminds of a previous painting that we saw, right? The interior space with the with this office table and a grouping of what looks mostly like men. Beautiful is maybe the same space that the photograph that you were thinking about. So you have the line drawings, but also windows coming in, soft light falling onto a finished wall, and then this brushstroke that I don't know, is it hair? Now we have orange hair on our mind going into the fireplace, or is it like a fire, tongue jutting out of it?
The guy's spirit is leaving or arriving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get, you're right. I mean, this is definitely one of these rooms that I love to use over and over again. I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving, because I can pretty much paint this out of my head happily, and I keep finding ways to use this space as a launching pad for different scenarios. It was very, very light painting originally, and as I began finishing it, I found that the windows needed to become more dominant, and I wanted to play up this sort of strange square pattern happening in the background, this rectangular pattern that's happening in the background.
Yeah.
And then finally, I was like, well, it's so odd to have all these people looking at each other. How can I remove them from the space? And I thought about this man's face as kind of firing away. And then there was a big fireplace, and I was like, well, it has to go somewhere, so let's just put it up the fireplace. So he's kind of wiping this sort of thing away. And again, this also is happening concurrently as I'm making this painting, concurrently with sort of the Black Lives Matters movement. I'm thinking about, like, what is some of the imagery that could be applied to this at this point?
Mm-hmm.
Wiping away the sort of like structure or this hierarchy possibly.
Yes, this is a wonderful close-up. It's also fascinating to see how you create this space, and to see how, when you step a few steps away, you can have almost like a photographic imagery of this reflecting table, right, that reflects the back of the room, and then to step forward and to see, how painterly it actually is. Like, the whole spatial depiction is just so wonderful here.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely brings about, I don't know, I haven't mentioned, but Giacometti, I think, comes to mind for many Europeans probably, like, especially looking at your work, here it especially to me, like the space and the lines, Giacometti and Francis Bacon, these, close friends. I don't know, was Bacon on your mind studying in England at that time? He was like one of the major artists remaining to be figurative, right, when everything turned so abstract. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's the modern, the sort of post-war modern masters, European masters, were really influential on me. I mean, like, there was a show in 2001, I think, right after 9/11, that was, or 2002, which was Giacometti at the MoMA.
yes.
And when I saw that, it completely transformed everything for me. And then at the same time, there was they had all the paintings that he was making. They had 2 rooms of his sort of portraits, and I was working on sort of these geometric compositions at the time, and I saw in his work a way of dealing with the linear as a descriptive, gestural way of describing space.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Bacon is all over the place, because what he does is he offers an alternative to way in which the figure can be presented.
Yeah.
In New York City, we have a very traditionalist school of figurative painting, or we have a very sort of self-taught, autodidactic school of figurative painting. And I think Bacon bridges the gap between the sort of early modern period into the sort of identity politic period. And so he's somebody who, when I first saw him, and I'm sure most young artists, when they see Francis Bacon, are riveted by his depth and power. And he's somebody who, you know, no matter what I do figuratively, he'll always come out in it, because he's just so, he influenced me so much early on as a way of thinking about how to present an emotional state, how to create a figure in a modern sense, a non-academic sense, and also somebody who was not afraid to really say to express how he felt. And that's something I think few artists, including myself, can really do as well as he did.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you share, the mood is similar. Here we see this painting in the making in your studio, and the interior on the right side as well. The interior scene. Yeah. Oh, and we see this beautiful power structure there on your shelf, right? The electric tower.
Pylons.
Exactly.
Pylon, yes.
Up on top, right?
Yeah.
Can't get enough of those pylons.
I see pylons. I think Tim Kent. So.
Yes.
Yeah, here we're coming to the end of the show here.
Yeah, this is it. This is finishing the show.
The master is thinking or resting or creating the next masterpiece.
Right. Yeah. This it's the last couple of days before a show. I'm always in the studio, and I don't really sleep a lot. So
this is a great shot. This is a wonderful shot.
Thank you.
Yes. Also to understand that it takes this time of digestion, right? Like thinking about letting it mature. Mm-hmm.
And here we see them in the gallery. Just a couple of shots of that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful space.
The beautiful space and the sheer size of them. Yeah. Art and agent. Yeah. Okay. Ladies, gentlemen.
Yes, congratulations, Tim.
Congratulations.
It's a wonderful show. Yeah.
Sylvia Guenter, thank you very much.
Thank you for
sharing all your insights.
And congratulations to your success. Fantastic. Thank you. We'll see you.
We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.